Back home, and what a year ahead it will be in politics. And of course, it's not just here in Australia, it's right around the world. To cast his eye over 2024, joining us at the desk, political strategist and commentator Bruce Hawker. Happy New Year, Bruce.
Same to you, Tim.
It's interesting having a look at what will unfold over the next couple of months. Of course, Anthony Albanese, the honeymoon period was over. Struggled a bit late last year. What are you expecting in the early part of 2024?
Well, of course, the first thing we're probably going to be looking at is a by-election in the seat of Dunkley following the very sad death of Peta Murphy,
God rest her soul.
A young woman who died far too early. And that will actually be an important moment, I think, for both the government and the opposition. Labor holds it by a reasonable margin, about 6%. She won it for Labor. Before that, it had been essentially Liberal, Mornington Peninsula electorate. So I think the government, though, will want to try to get that by-election out of the way, one way or the other, as soon as they can, because we're really not much more than 12 months away from the next election. And if you look back at the way things have gone, the first year was very much Labor's. You know, they went out to a big lead in the polls. They won the by-election in Aston. Peter Dutton struggled. Last year was very different, though. With the Voice dominating much of what was happening. That was bad for the government. And of course, interest rates continue to go. And since May 22, when Labor was elected, there have been 13 straight interest rate hikes. So a lot is going to depend on how the economy travels, I think, in the next few months.
And how people see themselves being supported as cost of living continues to bite. Let's isolate the two, because we do have some vision of Anthony Albanese, which we'll roll in. Let's look at him first, and then we'll look at Peter Dutton. What about the fortunes of the sitting Prime Minister?
Well, as I said, I think he's done well in the first part of his term, got out to a very big lead over Peter Dutton, and I think people were pretty happy. Problem that he's had essentially been twofold. One has been the Voice, which dominated politics in the last part of 2023 and cut out a lot of other things, and of course the economy. Although there's very low unemployment, the lowest almost on record under his government, cost of living's gone up. That's due to international factors. If the economy starts to improve in so much as the interest rates start coming down and there's more relief for people on their mortgages, that's very good news for the government. If it doesn't, then I think they're going to be in a fair bit of trouble, because at the end of the day, what people are going to be voting on, I suspect, at the next election will be the state of the economy and the state of their hip pocket.
Peter Dutton is yet to prove himself as a great retail politician. He's a very good attack dog. And that will be there for all to see if there are real struggles economically in these next few months.
Yeah. Look, you would expect Dutton to have done well in the last 12 months. I think really you'd be very surprised if Labor hadn't have gone back seriously because of the way in which interest rates just kept hiking. Dutton he's quite an aggressive politician. His problem, though, and I've said this time and again, is that he doesn't resonate well in those teal electorates. And there are 7 teal electorates that have basically hived themselves off from the Liberal Party and said, we're going independent. And he is a poor choice if you want to be winning back those seats. I mean, in the Voice, all those teal electorates voted for the Voice. So that was remarkable, much more than in Labor electorates. He's got a big challenge there ahead of him. I think he probably
Does he need to soften?
Well, I was going to say, if I was him, I'd be trying to soften a bit, but I'm not sure that he's got much of an opportunity to do that now, because he really set his attitudes in concrete in 2023, particularly around the Voice referendum. And that will be something that people will remember on both sides of politics. People who are hardcore conservatives will like him for that. People who actually wanted to see more Indigenous representation will mark him down for that. So he's got a fair bit of work ahead of him. And I don't think we should get too carried away with either him or the Prime Minister at the moment, because both of their situations have been reasonably predictable. Anthony Albanese's problem's been predictable, and I think Duttons have been too.
It's an interesting landscape. Interesting is a word we could use. I don't know what we use for US politics at the moment. It's quite extraordinary. We're not far away from Iowa. I think Donald Trump may have just finished another rally. What do you make of it all?
Well, I've just come back from the States and I spent 3 weeks there in Washington, New York, looking at what was happening. And I'll tell you, from the perspective of the anti-Trump section of the community, I think it's a bit worrying. I think Trump has actually got a fair bit of support amongst unlikely groups within what would normally be Democrat-leaning demographics. For example, he's picking up some support amongst young African American men, particularly, and in some Hispanic communities as well. On the other hand, every time there has been an election at a state level in the last year or so, it's really revolved around abortion. And I suspect that what we're going to see in this election coming up in November 2024 in the United States is that the female vote and the male vote will hive off in very different directions. And it'll just come down to a question as to the turnout on the day, because neither of these leaders, neither the president nor Trump, are actually popular in the great scheme of things. They've both got their own support base, particularly Trump, but you wouldn't describe either of them as overwhelmingly popular.
Will he be able to get through? I mean, he's had a fairly Teflon nature, hasn't he? He's been able to have things slip off him where, marking the 3rd anniversary of the Capitol riots these few days, the 6th of January.
I think that would have written him off, wouldn't you?
You would have.
Yeah. But in the United States, insurrection, division, violence, they're all part and parcel of the makeup of a country that's been like that basically since its inception. So it's not so different and difficult for American people to come to terms with those things as it is for Australians or British or people in other first world countries. So that's going to be a challenge for him if he does get convicted of any of those numerous court challenges that are before him at the moment. Then I think that will actually cut into his popularity. Polling has suggested that even though he's surging somewhat, if he does get convicted, then that would cut maybe 6 to 8% of his vote off the bottom. So that's not good for him at all if that happens. But all these court cases do tend to reinforce his base. And in the United States, we don't have compulsory elections. That's what happens.
Yeah, he's been getting a sugar hit and on many occasions. Finally, how do you think the whole Colorado, Maine thing will play out, where they've banned him off the ballot sheet and he's obviously approaching the Supreme Court to get that turned?
I think that plays to his strengths, really, in a way. I mean, we've got a highly politicised judiciary there, despite all their talk about separation of powers. And it does err strongly on the Republican side. Some of those justices were appointed by him. I think we'll see probably a 6-3 split, from the Republican appointees voting to say that he can go on the ballots, and 3 of the Democrats saying he can't. And he will use that to justify his position and say, well, there you go, there was no insurrection, I wasn't involved in it, the Supreme Court's ruled that way. So I don't think these court cases necessarily cut against him in every situation. I think some of them actually build up his legitimacy in a way that you would have thought, if you were looking at this 3 years ago, would be virtually impossible.
Any chance of a Haley comet? Any chance of Nikki Haley just taking the inside running here?
Only if he doesn't run for whatever reason.
Yeah.
He's got the Republican Party tied up now, no doubt about that. It is the Trump Party. It's not the Republican Party that we knew. It's the Trump Party, and it's a very different creature to what it was even 10 years ago.
Bruce, we'll talk again. Good to chat.
Thanks, Tim.